game devs. In this video, we're going to talk about bug testing, specifically what it's useful for, what it is, and why the part of the responsibilities of the production team, specifically game producer. So what is QA? Quality assurance is what the acronym means, but they're the people who ensure compatibility, functionality, and progression. So they're the people who are making sure that that it works on everything, that it works at all, and that you can actually do the things that the developers are claiming you can do in it. Typically QA come in like way kind of at the end of production, maybe in mid to late production, where they start to really ramp up. They're in kind of the post-production alpha beta section. That's where their work is really important. But there is also to have at least one person whose job it is to work with the team, QA lead, for instance, or maybe the producer themselves, who is keeping track of what it is that they're going to be testing and making sure and informing the development team of standards that need to be met in order to communicate to the QA team. So I've seen producers really bungle this as well. I've seen producers ban SneakerNet, which is the conversations where you walk over to the desk of someone and talk to them. I've seen what I call the nameless QA teams of just random people who kind of come on and off your project, and you just never know who they are, and there's just random people emailing you bugs, or maybe they're just not provided enough management. Like QA is often not provided with enough equipment. They get the hand-me-downs. So sometimes that can be really disheartening. It can lead to not only just bad games, but also bad atmosphere, just in terms of attitude. So if you're thinking about your QA as in negative connotations, this is often because there's just a bad atmosphere that's generated based off of the way it's communicating. You should love your QA team. Your QA team is what will make your game go from good to great. It is unlikely that your entire development team is as perfectionist as needed. So this can also lead to theft. Sometimes people are underpaid in the QA team. Being underpaid and undervalued is a straight way to getting stuff stolen. This can also just lead to bad behavior. But theft can also mean time theft, things like that as well. So you got to think about that when you're thinking about how you're going to handle a QA team. So the composition is usually there's a QA lead. Sometimes there's assistants, depending on how big the project is. Then there are actual testers. The testers are the people who are actually doing the testing of each section. They're the people who get that hourly wage usually, and they're managed by either the QA lead or assistant leads. So depending on, again, how big the project is. So you can think about, then there's also compatibility testers. This is a testing position that's generally held at a publisher company. Lot check or gold master milestones. When you send off a build, and this is what a lot of developers run into, is when you're working with a platform that isn't PC, there's actually a standard price tag every time you submit your build to the game, to the publisher. They will, or the hardware manufacturer. So when you submit it to the hardware manufacturer, they will double check everything and make sure it works on their system. And, they give you the standards that they're expecting. So for instance, and sometimes compatibility testers are looking for features that you're not supposed to have as well. I know that we were talking about the fact that there was an old DS game in which you're able to open and close the clamshell, or you're being able to open and close the DS in order to turn pages. We really wanted to do something like that, but we were told we weren't, we weren't able to, because it was just kind of something special for the internal studio, I guess, to be allowed to do. There's also QA programmers. Oftentimes when I'm at Microsoft, you'll see a lot of people who are writing QA code. And what I mean by QA code is smoke tests, which are, like AI that play through the game and try to find bugs on our without any humans, and also just like programming methodologies, or implementing data collection, that kind of thing as well. To work with a human computer interaction researcher. This is the background I have, and like. And then there's also playtesters. These are kind of users that you bring in just once or maybe twice to play the game. So usually in your target demographic. All right. So Microsoft and others, they do really good work in QA, and I consider the HCI research part of this QA in the QA department. They have experts in data collections. You might be familiar with Halo heat maps. This is something that is really common now, but they pioneered the research when Halo came out. And what they did was they figured out where everyone, all the players were shooting each other from. They were able to see sight lines and where bottlenecks were occurring and where death was happening. And they were able to then make better levels because they were able to, ease up bottlenecks based off of playtests. So it was really cool to be able to use data in order to scientifically do testing. There's also smoke testing. Smoke testing is when you've got AI running around shooting things. Sometimes they don't behave just like humans, but they can be helpful for like, hey, maybe you need to run into every single wall. Well, maybe we can program a dumb AI to do that for us instead of paying someone. It depends on how many walls you have, basically, and how much that would cost either way. So in order to be QA, you need a couple skills. You need excellent verbal and written communication. You need tolerance for repetition. And you need to be able to communicate to someone that their idea isn't working the way they wanted it. This can be really hard. I have a video that I'll link down below about communication and critique. So I'll link that down below. And generally an upbeat attitude is really helpful. Someone who is able to work in a shifting environment, that there's just oftentimes different standards and goals that get set every day, and it can be a little bit frustrating. So you just need to be able to roll with the punches. You do not need gamer skills. You don't need anything like that. A QA team should be composed of a variety of people, specifically ones around the customer around the customer base is good. But if you're working in, for instance, I worked on a lot of games for 10-year-olds, and we can't hire 10-year-olds to test games all the time. So we need a variety of skill sets. Sometimes it is really helpful to have that QA person who can 100% complete the game in 3 hours or whatever, and do a speed run. And we actually, we would rely on those people to get us home at night on Friday when the build was taking a really long time. Those people were the ones who could totally do it who can, blast through it at twice the speed of any of us, including the developers, by the way. To have any specific gaming skills. And in fact, it's actually kind of better if you have a variety of people who have maybe no skill in gaming versus in terms of the way that they play games. It'll give you more ability to test, and it'll give you more perspectives. So you also don't need to be formally trained or anything. There's no reason why you couldn't develop some communication skills. And this is really helpful for people who are not cut out for college, or not going to be working, or just don't have a college degree for whatever reason. This can oftentimes be an entryway where people can come in once you graduate out of Q. Sometimes you work in QA and you'll work in it for a while, but there's opportunities to move up into the production area. And it's just because being methodical and just being a good QA person means you're probably going to be a good producer in a lot of ways once you start doing more management stuff. So from the developer side, though, developers also need some skills. So first, they need to go watch my video on how to receive critique and give critique. But you need, but specifically being able to receive it. A lot of times it's hard to hear about how your baby is not perfect, and that can be difficult. Being able to receive a critique, even ones that are also not necessarily well written. Not every game developer or not every QA person is going to write a perfect email, and just an awareness that they're also working hard and are just on the same team, and that they have a difficult job. Also patience, and a convivial attitude. Just be able to talk to the QA team. Often there are QA people who are like, this is their first time in the industry, and there's a little bit of oh my God, I can't believe I'm here feeling, especially the way a lot of those QA positions are advertised, like, oh, I'm in the game industry now, and look at these developers. And there's, maybe a standoffishness at first because they're just kind of overwhelmed. And so just connect with them, and be aware, and try to connect with them on a human level. I don't know why more people don't do that. But that's what a developer needs to do. So if you are going to be a bug tester, let me just tell you right now how to write a bug. Everyone should know how to do this because everyone should be writing bugs. Everyone who works on a game is also a QA tester. That means that we're all QA testers, and we shouldn't be mean to them. But we're all QA testers. So let's talk about the composition of a bug. There's a lot of systems like Jira and Bugzilla, for instance. There's also an issue tracker in GitHub that you can use. These are all really great places to keep track of bugs. Some of them have more tools some have more tools than others in terms of like how you track them and like the ownership and all that stuff. That doesn't matter right now. But what you need to do is you need to put a title that's clear and descriptive. You need a description of what the bug is. You want to also write what you were expecting. So you're going to write that XYZ wasn't working, and then you're going to write what you were expecting to have working. So I remember once I got a bug that was just really it was not a bug from a developer perspective. I just went, oh, well, actually that's not a bug. That's just the thing I wanted it to have happen, which maybe is a slight ding on my design. But regardless, so they did not put down, and I had to go back and forth a couple of times. What was it that they thought was going to happen? The other thing to do is steps to reproduce. You have to say how you made the bug happen so that you can communicate that to the developer, and the developer can also make it happen because they have developer tools generally that will be able to open up and just kind of check out what's going on. Then also the percent chance to reproduce. Bugs can be really hard to track down sometimes, and if it only happens 1 out of 10 times, and you have to list what those steps are, obviously, how many times does that happen? It doesn't always happen all the time, and that can be really frustrating because, and that's just kind of like, I don't know why the bug is happening, otherwise they might be developers themselves. To be able to fix it. So just being able to say how often you can do it can be really valuable. The best ever. I worked on the DS a lot, and back then there was no way to really record your screen. So it was really difficult to track down bugs because they were all text-based, except for, I think it was the Japanese Sega QA team, the one that we were assigned to. That we had several people from the QA team over there that were recording using like webcams, which were just not around. They were not as prevalent back then. You didn't just have like cameras that you could whip out in your phone and actually record high resolution stuff. It took a lot of doing. But they would record video of all the bugs as they were submitting them if they were difficult. And I thought that was amazing, so helpful, because it really led to great communication, and that was actually really awesome as well because. I'm pretty sure the QA team was from Japan, as their English wasn't necessarily perfect, but it was very legible. I could understand what was going on, and the videos were just so helpful. So like video is also helpful. Screenshots can be helpful. Being able to do that using OBS or whatever. I also wanted to go over the difference between a focus group and a user test, because this is going to happen in QA. This is something that frustrates me because of just my background in HCI, but you're going to hear these words, and there are people in the industry that are going to say them wrong, and so you need to figure out which one they mean. And also, sometimes they use them incorrectly, and that's just something that I'm going to teach you what you should be using which thing for. So a focus group is like 6 to 10 people, and it's in a room, and generally you engage with a product. Sometimes it's playing the game, but you're asking questions to them as a group. So you're asking them like, oh, so how do you feel about the brand? It's important to kind of get a discussion going. There's a lot of flaws in focus groups that are, there are terms called like groupthink, where like where a dominant person or one person dominates the conversation, and then everyone goes, oh yeah, I think that too. But then when they step away from it, they realize that maybe they actually didn't think that. But it's a lot about market positioning and getting feedback from a group of users, and getting general feedback. And it's best to do it's best to do this like way early, when you're just really exploring like really broad topics early on. But also maybe when you're testing out something that might be a little controversial or whatever, maybe you need a focus group to kind of feel out what's going on in your project. So if you're working on like an M-rated game, maybe there's a need to do some more focus group tests with, for instance, like people who are not in the target demo, but the people, parents or something. A user test, however, is a single user. They can, this is the thing that you want to do, like with Glass or with where you're testing a few specific things. So this, a user test is a single user. You're testing something specific on the build of the game, and it can be at any time in development. And if you're doing a good work, you should actually be doing this multiple times during development, because, so you should be asking questions, of your users. So how do you test an outside user? So like in a user test, limit your testing sessions to like an hour. Don't give them too much work to do. They get tired. It's really difficult to also manage a long play session. So generally you'll have someone come in for an hour or whatever. Also, if you have kids and kid testers coming in, don't feed them. This is the worst idea ever. Don't let them like get all their stuff on your equipment, but pizza or whatever. But just beyond the like cleanliness part of it, you are in for not a great treat if you give a bunch of sugar and a bunch of food to kids. They're not going to want to pay attention. They're going to be really difficult to manage. Even just one of them. But if you're doing like a focus group where you're buying a whole pizza or whatever, that's kind of the thing that happens sometimes. So don't feed them until afterwards. Otherwise, you're probably not going to get the results you're after. Also, anonymize your data. Universities have IRBs. The IRB stands for the Internal Review Board. The industry does not. The internal review boards are committees that are based around at universities and other research facilities, and they basically decide whether or not proper protocols have been followed. So for instance, Cornell and Facebook and the University of California, and IRB sometimes can get it wrong and or right. There's been cases, for instance, like the Stanford prison study, where I think perhaps I think it's pretty well established that there could have been better IRB support there. So there was a research that Facebook did, where they were figuring out that you can actually transfer emotions through others through the Facebook network and it's called emotional contagion. So people were experiencing the same emotions without, like it says, without their awareness. This came up because a lot of times this was in the media. Talked about as the game as Facebook trying to figure out how to make users depressed by exposing them to certain people's posts. But then there's also really cool, and I'll post this down below, like the Riot games. So they got a lot of flack from that. But there was a review board process there. I'm sure that they were concerned and addressed their concerns about anonymizing data and also not having any long-term effects on people by experimenting on them. That's something that happened with the Stanford experiment. So, there's other opportunities for research that is industry driven, and those can be really interesting too, but also not if you don't publish it as a paper, like if you don't expose your data and your variables, then there's not really any proof that you're saying what you're saying, which is why it's important to connect with universities. The Riot Games may have on this video, but I believe that it was from their internal team, but if someone corrects me if I'm wrong, please. But they made this really great video about teamwork OP. It's called Teamwork OP. I'll put it down below. It's a video about how when you do when people start raging in League of Legends games, it makes their team go down, but there's more opportunities to pull their game out of that kind of if users don't do that. Instead, they're more, they're more of a team player and they support each other instead of saying like, yeah, don't feed, blah, 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 right? Then you'll find that the team win rates go up. And so, people who don't have that attitude are so that was a really cool thing that was just through data analysis. They could see the effects of video game development, or they could see the effects of text, the people talking. They were researching that. So in order to do this kind of research, you need to create a standard trackable set of data. When you're writing, so you need to think about like recording the same data for everyone. You want to write, if you're asking questions, unbiased questions. How do you feel about level 1 is way better than how awesome is this? A lot of times I've worked with developers who would write things in like that in order to develop in order to kind of get the words they wanted out of the user so that they could have a quote. And that's really shoddy work if you want real honest feedback, because a lot of times people will be like, oh, they want me to answer this and I'm not gonna, even though they know they'll still get their $50 or their pizza or whatever, like they may not do that for me if I say the bad thing, or they just don't want to tell you bad things because you're a stranger. So, for instance, like on Iron Man 2, tests are really useful in situations where, like, we had this control scheme that I was pitching. Iron Man has like this D-pad control scheme where you just like regular run around, jump. D-pad is for movement, ABXY is for like jump and combat. The War Machine character was the same side-scrolling game, but it had a one-handed mirror control. So it had a one-handed control. So both the D-pad and the ABXY were movement, and then the stylus on the bottom screen was where you shot, and then the game was up on the top screen. So that was something, especially for 10-year-olds. So it was like a mouse-based shooter. If you've ever played games on the touchscreen, it was more like a mouse-based shooter, and it worked. And this control scheme actually went against my general wisdom about developing handheld games, which is you should have both hands on the controller. And like for instance, like users who are 10, they have smaller hands, so it might be more difficult. But we brought in people, we tested it out, and we were like, actually, this works really well. I think we really landed on it. The other thing you need to do when you're testing a user is isolate the tester from you. You are a researcher. Everyone has a feeling of being watched. You want to get them comfortable, but also separate them from the parents. This can be best done with a one-way mirror, so the parents can still observe you. Most parents feel very protective of their kids, but also explain to them why you might be asking for them to be separate. This may also just be the position of the parent in the room if they'd like to be in the room, so that you could, for instance, have the player playing the game and then the parent just way behind them or on the other side. But in an ideal environment, you're going to be using one white glass, and you are also going to be separate from the player. And then also the surroundings inside the testing environment should be similar and comfortable. So make it feel relaxed, a couch, that kind of thing. That's really important in order to get a good environment. So the best QA team is the one that feels supported and connected to the development team. Then they will be able to give honest feedback. And they'll be, so when I talk about honest feedback, I usually think about feedback as something that you give your friends because your friends need it. And a stranger generally won't want to give you feedback, even if it is their job. A stranger will feel a little uncomfortable giving you feedback if they don't know you, if it's negative or if it's something about something broken. Like everyone really loves it when someone says, "Oh, I love your jacket" or something. But not everyone loves that, but I'm sure that a lot of people do. So the best QA team is able to connect with the team, and that's usually done if they'll provide honest feedback if they feel connected. The ability to reproduce and document feedback, reproduce a bug and document that, that's really important. Engaged in a project very early on. The QA lead at least should be there early on the development process, because how you write your game design, level design documents. What if the data, I had to write up a lot of documents for the QA team for like where collectibles are so that I could make their job easier, because their job isn't find all the collectibles. Their job is to collect all the collectibles. Like the finding part probably isn't part of what it is that you need to do. So, you should be able to talk with your team about that, and QA leads can be really important in leading the discussion on that if you're working in the development process. That's the kind of thing you want to do if you're in QA. There's a lot of different opportunities, but setting up a team, getting a schedule down in terms of how what it is that you want to fix can be really important. If you have any questions about anything here, post them down below. Otherwise, I will see you in class.